So good morning, everybody. We are today going to conclude the review of chapter 1 of Tractate Megillah. We are holding Daf Zayin Amud Beis at 16b, and we're going to start about 8 lines down from the words Vayipal al Tzavare Binyamin. So the Gemara tells us that it says in the pasuk that Binyamin, excuse me, let me go back. Vayipal al Tzavari Binyamin, yeah. Vayipal al Tzavari Binyamin achiv, that Yosef fell on his brother Binyamin's neck and he cried. Now, the Hebrew word for neck over here is in a plural form, Tzavare, as if it says the necks, like as if Binyamin had 2 necks, to which the Gemara asks, well, how many necks did Binyamin actually have? To which Rabbi Loza answered, and he said that this is an allusion to the fact that Binyamin was going to have 2 temples that were going to be built in his portion in Yerushalayim, and they were going to be destroyed. And so therefore, when it says the necks, Binyamin, Yosef was crying for those. Now, how does neck symbolize the fact that it's referring to the Beis Hamikdash? The answer is because the Beis Hamikdash was at the highest point of the world. However, it was a little bit lower down, not right at the top. There's a whole calculation based on a spring called Mayin Itam, right? It was a certain spring that they would use to be able to immerse themselves in and use the spring as a mikvah. And based on the calculations of where that spring was and how it came down and so on, we learn that in fact the Beis Hamikdash was situated a little bit lower than the highest point. So where's the highest point in a human being? His head. Slightly lower down is the neck. And we say with regards to an animal, right, the strongest part of the animal is his neck. That's where you put the yoke, right? Because that's the strongest part. So from there we learn that it was referring to the Beis Hamikdash. And because we're talking about two temples, that's why it says the necks. Then the pasuk continues that Binyamin.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, isn't there something about the shoulders of the animal is praiseworthy, or there's a pasuk referring to the shoulder of the animal?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, it's in connection with Yosef. When Yosef I think Yosef is compared to a shore, but I have to go back and look at it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think you're right that there is some pasuk that alludes to the strength of the shoulders and the neck of the ox. Okay. So then it continues and says that Binyamin cried on the shoulder of Yosef. Now, what's that referring to? If we said that the 2 necks of Binyamin referred to the 2 Beis Hamikdash, so what was Binyamin crying about? He was crying about the Mishkan that was in Shiloh. Shiloh was in the portion that was going to be given to Yosef, right? And it was going to be destroyed, so he cried for that. And as I mentioned when we learned this last time, the Rebbe asks a very logical question. Well, why are they crying for each other? Why not cry for yourself? If somebody has a tragedy happen in their family or in somebody else's family, of course, I try to partake in somebody else's sorrow like it was my own. But certainly, I should be crying for my own sorrow, the plight of my own household first, and even more so. To which the Rebbe explains that the idea of crying is when a person gets to a point where there's nothing left to do. There's nothing more that they can do, at which point you cry. When the Beis Hamikdash is in your portion, and it is your responsibility to ensure that the Beis Hamikdash is not destroyed, there's no time for you to cry, you have to do everything in your power to make sure that it is not destroyed, and if it is destroyed, that it be rebuilt. Whereas when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash or somebody else, you could try to support them, you could try to help them, but ultimately you cannot fix it for them. They have to fix it themselves, and therefore there comes a point where it is appropriate to cry. Okay, so now the Gemara continues and says as follows, that when it says, when in the encounter between Yosef and his brothers, it says, behold, your eyes see as do the eyes of my brother Binyamin. What does this mean? So Rabbi Elazar explains that it means that he was saying to them, Yosef was telling his brothers, that just like there's no resentment in my heart against Binyamin because he was not involved in my sale, so too I have no resentment in my heart against you. And, you know, this is really a very important lesson in life, because sometimes when someone else has been hurt by your actions, right, you find it very difficult to believe that they hold no resentment against you. However, it really is possible for a human being to not hold resentment towards somebody else. How? Well, for example, in the case of Yosef, because he was able to reframe the whole narrative of what happened to him and see it as not them sending him into Egypt, but rather this was something that was ordained by Hashem, and it was Hashem involved in every step. So therefore, he truly didn't see it as them being the ones who were responsible for what happened to him. Rather, they were just messengers of Hashem, right? They were messengers of Hashem. So, you know, I was listening to somebody recently, and he gave the following example. So somebody comes along and he gets fired from his job. He gets fired from his job and he doesn't know what to do. What am I going to do? Where am I going to have my parnasa from? What am I, like, how am I going to continue to survive? So he quickly goes to his Rebbe and he asks his Rebbe, what am I supposed to do? To which his Rebbe asks him and says, let me ask you a question. He says, tell me, do you have a mailbox? He said, yep, I have a mailbox. He says, and do you get mail? He says, yep, I get mail. He says, can you tell me, who's the mailman that brings you your mail? He says, I have no idea. Well, why do I care? He says, what do you mean, what do you care? How else are you supposed to get your mail? I mean, the mailman is the one who brings you your mail. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. My mail comes every day, and it doesn't matter if it's this person or that person brings the mail. What's the difference? To which the Rebbe said to him, no, the same over here. Hashem knows your mailbox address, and he's going to send you what you need. What is the difference to you whether the mailman is this particular employer or that employer? If you're able to reframe your life and see it through that lens, then you really are able to remove any resentment towards any particular individual that may come and do something that may affect you. In fact, the Alter Rebbe in the end of the Tanya, in his letters, he quotes from the Gemara that says that anybody who gets angry, it says in the Gemara, it's as if they worship idols. Why? What's this idea of worshiping idols by getting angry? So he explains, because if a person gets angry at somebody else, what you're really saying is that this person had power outside of Hashem's domain, to do harm to you, even though Hashem has not ordained this for you. But if a person were to truly realize that there is no power outside of Hashem, and that no one can ever harm you, and no one can ever do any good for you outside of Hashem, then there's no reason to have resentment or to get angry. Okay, so the Gemara continues that Yosef said, for it's my mouth that is speaking to you. And what he's saying over here is, just as my mouth speaks, so it is in my heart. And we have a similar idea to this when it says in the beginning of Parashat Vayeshev that the brothers were not able to speak with him peacefully. And Rashi points out, what does it mean they're not able to speak? I mean, you know, anybody can do anything. If you want to say something, you can say something. So Rashi explains, when it says in the pasuk lo yuchlu, they were not able, right? Not they didn't want to, but they weren't able. It's because they were such true people, they were not able to have something in their mouth and something else in their hearts. So to Yosef is saying, I'm just like you. I'm not going to say something if I don't truly believe it, if it's not really something that I'm feeling in my heart. Okay. Then the Gemara continues, and it says that Yosef sent his brothers home with gifts for Yaakov. As it says, Ula Aviv, and to his father, he sent the following. What was it? 10 donkeys laden with the best of Mitzrayim. So the Gemara wants to know, what is the best of Mitzrayim? What are the things that he sent? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yamin Bar Yefes said in the name of Rebbe Elazar. As you'll notice, all the things here we're saying are in the name of Rebbe Elazar. Right? So this is another thing in the name of Rebbe Elazar that he sent to him aged wine. Why? Because it's something that pleases the elderly. Okay. Now, although Yaakov assured his brothers that he didn't hold a grudge against them, but when Yaakov passed away, they feared that things are going to change because, maybe it was just like Yaakov and Esav. Do you remember the story with Yaakov and Esav? Esav said, when my father will die, that's when I'm going to take revenge. So they were afraid, maybe, all the niceties is all out of respect for Yaakov, not because he really truly loved them. And so therefore they went and they flung themselves before him. Another statement from Rabbi Yom Bar Yefes in the name of Elazar was that this is what this story is what's meant when people say, when the fox has his hour, then bow to him. In other words, at the end of the day, Yosef is right now seeing success, so you have to bow to him, even if he's a fox. Now the Gemara asks, well, why are you comparing him to a fox? In other words, a fox seems to be an inferior animal compared to the lion. So when you're comparing Yosef to the brothers, why would he be inferior? Why could he not be the king of the pack? Why couldn't he be the lion? Right? Why is he considered the fox? So the Gemara accepts that this is a refutation because there really is no reason to see him other than what he was, the leader, right? So therefore, it must be not vis-a-vis his brothers that he was being called a fox, but rather it was being vis-a-vis his father, because it refers to the story when Yaakov came and he prostrated himself towards the head of the bed. But that's when Yosef was called to his father, and this is when his father wanted him to promise him that he was going to take him out and bury him in Eretz Yisrael. So it says in the name of Rebbe Elazar again that this is what is meant, that when a fox has his hour, bow to him, which means to say that Yaakov needed Yosef, and he needed Yosef to be very smart, like a fox, to be able to bury him outside of Mitzrayim and get permission from Parai. Now here, it makes sense to say that Yosef is inferior and is considered a fox and not a lion, because it would be disrespectful to consider him to be a lion over his father, that he was a ruler over his father. Now, it just occurred to me that this is actually the fulfillment of the prophecy that Yosef had, right? What do I mean? It said, if you remember the story, right, when he had his dream, he had the sun and the moon, his father and his mother, and all the brothers bowing down to him. So this is the only place really where we find Yaakov actually bowing down to Yosef. In this case, just before he passed away, we find him bowing towards Yaakov. Okay, moving on.
Rabbi,
So then, yeah.
Before you move on, can I ask you? They say they give an answer why the tzavarim is tzavarav are two for Benjamin, because the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed twice. But what about Benjamin crying on Joseph's two tzavarim?
No, it doesn't say that. It says al tzavarov.
Tzavarav means more than one.
No, tzavarov means one. Tzavarei is many.
Yeah.
Tzavarov is his neck.
Tzavar shelo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Tzavarov
Shelo.
is Tzavarav.
Yeah.
But Tzavarei Binyamin is plural. Tzavarav
Okay.
is singular. Tzavarav is singular.
So that's Shiloh. Okay.
And that refers to Shiloh. Now, it says that he comforted them. Who is this? Yosef is comforting his brothers, and he spoke on their hearts. It says Rabbi Yamin Bar Yefes again, a teaching in the name of Rebbe Lazar, and he says this teaches us that he spoke to them words that are that resonated, that made sense, that they could accept. And what did he say to them? He said, if 10 candles were not able to extinguish one, meaning if you 10 were not able to extinguish me, you have one candle, how's he able to extinguish 10 others? So therefore, I'm not going to be able to do harm, and I would never think of it. And that was something that reassured them that Yosef really had no intentions of harming them. Then the Gemara goes back to the Megillah, which said, and what does this mean? It means that they had light and gladness and joy and honor. Each one of these things correspond to something that they celebrated. And the first one is Ora, which is Torah, right? And it brings a pasuk like it says, Ner mitzvah, the Torah are, that the commandments is a lamp and the Torah is a light. Simcha refers to Yom Tov like it says, V'samachta b'chagecha, you shall rejoice on your festival. So we know Simcha refers to the festival. Sosain Zumila, joy refers to circumcision, like it says, Sos anecha limrasecha, I rejoice over your word, right? Now, what is the imrasecha referring to, right? So the imrasecha is referring to the bris, like it says by Yomer. It says by Yomer lekim al Avram va'ata es brisi tishmar. So by Yomer is that imrasecha that David HaMelech is talking about. This is referring to the story where David HaMelech went into the bathhouse, and as he was standing there naked, he felt not only was he physically naked, but he was also spiritually naked because he had no mitzvahs that he could perform in the bathhouse. So he was trying to figure out, what is there to celebrate? What is it to be happy about when I'm in the bathhouse and I have no mitzvahs? But when he realized that he had his bris milah, right? So therefore he rejoiced al imrosecha, on the word that Hashem said to Abraham, that you and your children should have circumcision. So that's how we know that sasain, right? This idea of joy refers to milah. Vikar we said refers to tefillin. Now, what does it mean, tefillin? Right, the honor is considered tefillin because it says that all the nations of the world will see that the name of Hashem is called upon you, and they will be in awe of you. Which is a form of honoring you. So, what does this mean? That people will see that the name of Hashem is upon you or called upon you. This refers to the tefillin shabarosh. And so, therefore, when it says vikar, which means honor, this refers to the tefillin. Okay. Then we continue on to talk about the 10 sons of Haman. It says all the names of Aseres B'nai Haman. And we're told that the 10 names of Haman, including the word Aseres, all have to be said in one breath. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why we say this pasuk out aloud, and we don't just rely on the one who's reading to read it for us. Because although he can fulfill our obligation to hear the Megillah, but the obligation to recite it in one breath, he can't do for us. That we have to do on our own. That's why we read it on our own. So now, what's the reason you have to read it all in one breath? The reason is because all of them passed away together at the same time. In one moment, they all died away. They died at the same time, and that was a miracle. And to commemorate that miracle, we recite it in one breath. So Rabbi Yochanan also continues to say that he says that the vav of Vayezasa, right, has to be written in a long way. So it's elongated, and it's a bit like a pole that's used by boatmen on the river. And what's the reason why you have this long, elongated vav? Because they were all hung on one pole, one above the other. So in order to allude to that, we have this elongated vav when it says Vayezasa. Now, excuse me. Reb Chanina bar Papa says that Dorish Sheila Ish Kfar Tam Rata, that he says as follows: you have in the Torah very special, unique ways of writing a shira. If you ever looked inside the Sefer Torah and looked at the Oz Yashir, you'll find that the Oz Yashir has breaks in it. So you have a left column, a middle column, and a right column, and then you have a small half column, then another. So it's like
Bricks.
bricks. That's right. So the way it's described over here is half bricks, right? So the machlekes between Rashi and Tosfos, but whatever the
And
point
bricks because it has space in between
That's
the
right.
bricks.
So when it comes to two places in Tanakh, right? On the one hand, it's a shira because we find the oppressors of the Jewish people, the enemies of the Jewish people, being killed. But on the other hand, what we find is that although it's a shira, right, it is in just two columns, and these two columns, right, have a massive space between the two columns. And the idea behind it is because we don't want to give them any foothold to climb back up. We want them to just fall straight through. That's why. So now we continue on in the Megillah, and it says that the king said to Esther Hamalka, in Shushan Habira, the Jews killed, right, so and so many. Now, Hamisha Vashivim Olaf, it was like 75,000, right? So it sounds in the beginning of the pasuk as if Achashverosh was frustrated and upset, right? Because he's complaining. Look what havoc the Jews are wreaking on my kingdom. They're killing so many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, right? But then he turns around and he says to the queen, "What else do you want? And I'll give you." So Rabbi says this comes to teach us that there was a malach that came and hit him on the mouth, right? Hit him on the mouth when he was started to complain about the Jews, right? Then he got hit on the mouth. Okay, now after recalling how Haman had placed the Jews in grave danger, the Megillah says when Esther appeared before the king, the words over here are very strange. Amar im hasefer, he said with a letter that the wicked the wicked scheme that Haman had devised against the Jews should be recoiled on his own head. Now, who's speaking over here? We're saying when Esther came before the king, and yet it says Amar, which in Hebrew is masculine, so it sounds like this isn't Esther anymore. So it should have really said Amra. Why does it say Amar in Sefer? So Rabbi Yechanan says that this phrase is really not part of the recounting of the story, but it is telling us about a ruling concerning the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, that Amra loy ye omer bepeh mashakosu b'sefer. The Megillah should be recited from what is written in the scroll. Amar in Sefer is really kind of like taking a pause from the whole narrative to tell you that you're supposed to read the Megillah from within the scroll itself, not to say it by heart, and not to read it from a chumash. It should be read from the scroll itself. Okay. So now, as we'll see later on in the beginning of the second chapter, that somebody who reads it by heart has not fulfilled his obligation. So now the Megillah records that dispatches were sent to all of the Jews containing divrei shalom ve'emes, words of peace and truth. What does this mean? So we're taught that Talmud say, and others say it was Asi who said that this teaches me that the Megillah scroll needs to have etched lines, just like a Torah scroll, right? Just like an actual Torah scroll. That's what Divrei Shalom ve'emes comes to teach me. That we know that Torah is called emes. So just like the Torah has sirtut, these etched lines before you can write it, so too the Megillah has to have it as well. And then it continues and says, right, that Umamar Esther Kiyam, Esther's words validated these regulations for Purim. So now the question is, right, when you say Esther's words alone contributed to the miracle, what about the matters of the fasts that were mentioned in the previous? These also certainly contributed to the miracles that took place. So Rabbi Yechanan says No, it's not one or the other. It's really both. That it's a continuation of the previous verse. It refers to both the fasting and the matters of Esther that all brought about the miracle of Purim. Okay, then we continue to say that with regards to Mordechai, who was a viceroy to the king Achashverosh, and he was a great man among the Jewish people and popular. It says L'Roiv Echad, the most of his brothers, or to the multitude of his brethren. So, but when it says L'Roiv, right? Anytime you say L'Roiv and you don't say L'Kol, so we imply that it's not to everybody. So who are the people? It's like when the kid comes home and says, I got 97% on my test, and the father wants to know which ones did he get wrong, right? So when the Megilla says L'Roiv Echad, we want to know who didn't like Moshe, who didn't like Moshe. So it says that some of the people, who didn't like Mordechai. So some of the Sanhedrin were not happy that even after the end of the miracle of Purim, right, when things were resolved, he didn't come back to be fully engaged in the Sanhedrin and in learning, but he stayed and he stayed involved in political affairs. Rav Yosef says that from here we see that the study of Torah is greater than saving lives. How do we see this? Because initially Mordechai is reckoned as the fifth, right, among the sages, right, and in the pasuk, and later on he is reckoned as number 6. And so it seems that his importance among the Chachamim declined. That is because of his reducing his time and his involvement in the study of Torah. And it brings the psukim, and we see how, and the first time in the first pasuk he's mentioned as number 5, and in the second pasuk he's mentioned as number 6. So now, yes.
So how do you explain the Hadrat Melech?
Rav Am Hadras Melech. What do you mean?
Is it you're saying that not all, but when we're talking about this, praising Hashem, we use that terminology when we're actually meaning the entire group should be the one to. So,
right. So the answer is that Rav, right, can mean many, right, which means the more the merrier. But Rav Am means with a great multitude, right? That is the honor of the king. But here it's not Rav, but Roiv, right? Rav and Roiv are different words. Rav means for Rav Am Hadras Melech, with a multitude, with a great number, right? Is the glory of the king, right? Roiv means most. You translate it as most of his brothers, right? Most of it. Roiv means like you have a roiv versus a miut. Roiv means a majority. So when you say majority, right, that's something else. So when it says Barav Am Hadras Melech, it doesn't mean with a majority, but rather with a multitude. So it's a different way of translating it. Okay, so Amar Rav says, another say it was said the statement was made by Reb Shmuel Bar Marsa that once we're already mentioning, right, how important it is to study that Mordechai actually lost his some of his respect because of the diminished study. So we continue to bring another statement that the study of the Torah is even greater than building the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because we find by Ezra that so long as Baruch ben Neriah was alive, and that was his teacher, and he could learn Torah from him, so Ezra did not leave him to go and emigrate to Eretz Yisrael. And once we're ready on the subject of talking about the importance of Torah study, the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Yitzchok Bar Shmuel Bar Marta, Gadol Talmud Torah Yesem Kibud Avayim. Talmud Torah is even greater than Kibud Avayim. Kibud Avayim is very high up there, right? It's one of the Aseret Hadibros. And nevertheless, we say that Talmud Torah is even greater than Kibud Avayim. Why? How do we see this? Because we have an instance where Yaakov failed to some extent in honoring his parents for all the years that he was away from his parents, but the years that he spent in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, He was not punished, even though during that time he did not make contact with his parents. And the Gemara says, as it was taught, that why does the Torah take the pains to tell us about the years of Yishmael? Why are they counted in the Torah? So it's in order to be able to calculate through them the years of Yaakov, right? We're not really interested in Yishmael for himself per se, but rather to tell us as a reference point to the years of Yaakov, because, and here goes the calculation that we know, because the Torah tells us how old Yishmael was when he passed away. He was 137. Okay, so the accountants in the room, put your hats on. Here goes. How much older was Yishmael than Yitzchok? We got 14 years. How do we know? Because Avram was 86 years old when Hagar gave birth to Yishmael, and it says that he was 100 years old when he gave birth to Yitzchok. So you've got at the time of Yitzchok's birth, Yishmael was 14 years old. Okay, so now, once we say that Yishmael was 14 years older, it says that when Yaakov and Esau were born, Yitzchok was 60. So that means you add 14 to 60, Yishmael was 74 at the time. Okay, so now, how many years were left for the life of Yishmael? What is 137 minus 34? So, excuse me, minus 74. So you have 63 years left. You got 63 years from the time that Yaakov was born and Yishmael passes away. Okay, 63 years. Okay, so now, in order to prove that Yaakov was 63 years old at the time that he received the blessings from his father, Yitzchok, which corresponds to the time of Yishmael's death, we bring this brisa, which shows us that this is the case. What's the brisa? It says that Yaakov was 63 years old at the time he was blessed by his father, and at the same time, Yishmael passed away. How do we know? Because, watch this. Yaakov's, right after this, if you remember, right after the story of the blessings, where Yaakov went in and he got the blessings from Yitzchok, right? So Esau wanted to kill Yaakov, and and I'm getting mixed up with it. Rivka turned around to Yitzchok and said, I want Yaakov to go and marry from my family, right? So let's send him away. So it says that Esau saw, right, that it pleased Yitzchok that Yaakov was going to get married, at that age. So he decided that he's also going to go and marry into the family. Who's he going to go and marry? He decided he's going to go and marry the daughter of Yishmael, right? The daughter of Yishmael. This was at what juncture? This was at the juncture of when Yaakov took the brachas from Esau, okay? And we told that he was 63 years old when he took them. So now, what we want to prove now is, at that time, Yishmael passed away. How do we know? Because when it talks about Esau taking Machlas Bas Yishmael, it concludes and says that it was Achos Nevoyes, that she was the sister of Nevoyes. Now, why do we need to know that she's the sister of Nevoyes, right? If she's the daughter of Yishmael, we already know that she's the sister of Nevoyes. Rather, it's coming to teach us that to begin with, Esau wanted to marry her, and Yishmael agreed to the marriage. So Yishmael betrothed her to Esau, but he died before the marriage took place. And when he ended up marrying her, he was given over in marriage to Esau by the brother, by Nevoyes. So from here we see that that at the time that Yishmael passed away at the age of 137, Yitzchok was Yaakov was 63 years old, right? And now, from that point, from 63 years until Yosef was born, we've got 14 years that he was in Lavan's house. Okay, this means that he should have been 77 years old at the time that Yosef was born. 77. Okay. So then it's written that Yosef was 30 years old when he stood before Paroi, right? So now you've got 77 plus the 30 years, right? Plus you have the 30 years that Yosef was 30 years old when he was standing in front of Paroi. So if you add that all to Yaakov's life, it turns out that Yaakov should have been 107 years old when he came before Paroi, right? You have add to 1 second.
That's correct, Rabbi.
Right. So now you add to this 7 years of the plenty and the 2 years of the famine. So then this should be 116, which means to say as follows: from when Yosef comes before Paroi until Yaakov comes down, really it should be 116 years. He should be 116 years old. Why? Because you have the first 7 years of the famine, as Yosef predicted with Paro's dream, and then we know that the famine, after 2 years of the famine, that's when Yaakov came down. So that should be altogether 116 years. But now, what does it say when Yaakov actually comes before Paroi? Paroi asks him, "No, tell me, young man, how old are you?" So he says, "I'm 130 years old." Right? So now we've got a problem, right? He should have been 116. So there's 14 years missing from the calculation. How could he be 130 when really, based on all our calculations of how much time he spent in the house of Lavan, right? And how old he should have been when Yosef was born, and how old he should have been when Yosef came before Paroi, and how old he should have been when he stood in Paroi, we're missing 14 years. So this teaches us that the 14 years that we're missing, he went and he studied in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, and it's not counted in the calculation in Chumash. However, we clearly see that there's a discrepancy between the years where we know what he did from the Torah itself to the years that we don't know what he did. And so the Gemara tells us that these years were 14 years that he spent in the academy of Shem and Aver, right? How do we know? It was taught in the Brisa that Yaakov was hidden away in the academy of Aver for 14 years, and Aver died 2 years after Yaakov had gone down to Aram Naharaim. So for Yaakov had left there and arrived in the Aram Naharaim, and we find that when Yaakov stood at the well, right, he was 77 years old. So it's obvious that 14 years have elapsed between his departure from the house of Lavan at the age of 63 and his arrival at Lavan's house, which is the age of 77. So therefore, that's what happened with those years. So now, going back to the main point of this whole calculation, because the whole reason why we brought any of this is to show how powerful study of Torah is. So how do we know that he was not punished for neglecting to honor his father during the time that he was studying Torah? We know that he was punished for neglecting to honor his father and mother, right? And that's why he didn't see Yosef for so many years. But how do we know that he wasn't punished for these years? It says it was taught in the Brisa that we find that Yosef was separated from his father for 22 years. Why? Because this was midah keneged midah, right? Measure for measure. Just as Yaakov was separated from his father, because right. So the question we're left with is, if it's midah keneged midah, measure for measure, then seemingly it was 36 years that he was away from his father, right? From the age of 63 until 36 years later, right? So the Brisa tells us that it's rather that the 14 years that Yaakov spent in the Aver, for that it was not included in the calculation, and he was not punished for it. Okay, but at the end of the day, he was only away from his parents for 20 years. So why was he punished for 22 years? So the Gemara tells us because there were 2 years that he delayed along the road, along the way. He could have come faster, but he didn't. He left from Aram Naraim, and then he came to Sukkot, and he stayed there for 18 months. And Yaakov went from Sukkot and he built himself a house for his livestock. He made shelters, and then when he came to Beis El, he stayed there for another 6 months and brought sacrifices. So ultimately, there was this extra 2-year period that he prolonged in coming back to his father. So instead of it being 20 years, with the 20 years that he was in the house of Lavan, it was 22 years that Yosef was withheld from him, measure for measure, for the 22 years that he stayed away from his parents. And that is the conclusion of this first chapter of Megillah. Now, what I said we'll do, but before I get to what we're going to do, are there any questions or anything that anybody wants to share or ask before we go any further?
I'd like to go back to what I said about the necks.
Yep.
Savarei is the necks, his necks, but Savarav shel Yaakov is again the plural, the necks of Yaakov. Because when you say here, Shnotav shel Ishmael, isn't that plural? Shnotav?
No.
Yes.
No? That's singular?
No, it means his years.
His years is the same as his necks.
No.
Savarav and Shnotav is the same thing. I know that Savaro is singular, Savarav is plural.
1 second. There are other places where Savarov.
All the places the same thing. When it's 2 hands, you say Yadav. When it's 2 legs, you say Raglav. You don't say Raglo. Raglo is one leg. And Yado is 1 hand.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to argue about it, but
no,
I know that in my time, that's the way we use it.
Okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to get to it right now, but
Okay.
I will be neder. I will go and follow it up for you, and I will come back. And
Thank you.
And yeah.
But to me, when they say crying on his shoulder, on his necks, or it doesn't necessarily mean that he has 2 necks. It's the 2 sides of his neck. He could cry on both sides of the neck.
Okay, I will have to come back to you on this.
Okay.
I will look up. I will look this up further, and then I'll come back to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So now, the next thing I would like to do with you is I want to show you this test. Can you all see it? Let me just 1 second.
If you can make it a little
I
larger, I
know.
would appreciate it.
I'm going to. Page width. All right, is that better?
So much better.
Okay, so I have 2 questions for each staff, and I'm going to read them out to you, and then Lina, I will email them out to everybody, and it's for you to, if you choose to fill it out with pleasure, those who have contact with Rabbi Smith, this might be able to help with essays or something he mentioned to me, but you'll have that direct conversation with him. But let me just go through the questions, make sure that they're understandable. Sometimes I find that the students don't do well on their tests, not because they don't know the material, but because the teacher doesn't know how to write the question. And so therefore the question is so confusing that the students have no idea what he's talking about, even though they know the material. And that's why when I make tests, I don't make excellent tests, but I do try my best to make sure to explain the questions to the students so that they understand what we're talking about. Okay, so here it goes. Daf 2, this is the first daf. We know that the Gemara starts from daf base. Okay, first question is, when does a city wall have to date from to be considered a walled city for reading the Megillah on the 15th? 1 second, I have to mute everybody. Mute all. Let me share it again. Okay. Which means to say, we know that the Megillah is written in the unwalled cities on the 14th. It's written in walled cities on the 15th. From what time does the wall have to be standing in order for you to be considered a walled city? Obviously, not every walled city that exists today reads on the 15th. So what's the criteria? From what date? The next question is, what criteria does a Bezdin need to meet before they can overturn a previous one, right? In other words, if you have a Bezdin and they make a ruling, right? I'm just gonna edit this previous ruling, right? Of a Bezdin that exceeded. Okay. In other words, when you have a law, right, that is enacted by a Bezdin, right, and it becomes accepted by the community, in order to be able to revert that ruling, you need to have a certain level of greatness, right, that will allow you to do that. And the Gemara tells us the two things that are needed in order to be able to overturn a previous ruling of a Bezdin that preceded them. Okay, so that's the second question. Now, the next in Daf Gimel, the question is that we read over there in the Gemara that Yonasan ben Uziel, he translated, right? He turned it into Aramaic the Nevi'im, right? And the question is, why did he not write a Targum for the Ksuvim? What stopped him from writing a Targum for the Ksuvim? Okay, so the Gemara says exactly what happened and why he didn't do it. The next question is, who was greater, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, meaning as a group, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, or Daniel? And in which way, right? In what way were either Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi greater than Daniel, or was Daniel greater than Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi? Now, this could be either that Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were greater than Daniel, or Daniel was greater than Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, or Daniel was greater than Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi in one way, and Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were greater than Daniel in another way. So that's the question. Daf 4, right? It says, why are women also obligated to hear the Megillah? We know that women are not obligated in 613 mitzvahs in the same way that the men are. The mitzvahs that are connected with time, they're not obligated. They're usually not obligated in. But when it comes to the reading of the Megillah, they are obligated to. And the question is why? Why does it pertain to them as well as to the men? Okay, so the Gemara answers why. The next question is, why do we not read the Megillah on Shabbos? We read it from the Sefer Torah on Shabbos. Why don't we read from the Megillah on Shabbos? Which means to say, if Purim, the 14th day of Adar, falls out on Shabbos, we don't read the Megillah. And there's a special reason why we don't do it. It's called Gezerah de Rabbah, So the question is, what's the Gezerah? What was this Gezerah why we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos? Okay. Daf Hey. So the first question is, why is a minyan required when the Megillah is read before Purim? Now, this doesn't mean that you cannot read the Megillah with, well, let me go back. When the Megillah is read on Purim itself, on the 14th, right? We're told that you can read it with a minyan or without a minyan. It's better to read it with a minyan, but you can read it even without a minyan. But when we are making a particular leniency for people to come in on Monday or Thursday before Purim to read the Megillah early, there the Gemara says you have to read it with a minyan. And the question is why? Why do you need to read it with a minyan? What's the particular thing that we want to achieve by reading with a minyan that we need specifically when it's not on the day of Purim? Okay. Now, the next question is, did Rebbe try to uproot Tisha B'Av? I mentioned this before. There was that we had an account in the Gemara where one teacher was teaching a few things about Rebbe, and one of the things was that he planted one of these plants on Purim. But one of the things is, it says that he wanted to uproot. Well, the question is, did Rebbe try to uproot Tisha B'Av? I don't want to give it all away. Okay, Daf 6. Rakas is Sipori or Rakas is Tiveria? And how do we prove one way or the other, right? So if you remember, there was a discussion. Rabbi Yechanan got up and he said that when I was a child, I said something that I asked all the people and they said I was correct. Anyway, there's a whole discussion over there about whether Rakas, right, mentioned in the Pasuk, is referring to Tzipori or it's referring to Tiveria. Many proofs were brought, and the question is, which one is it? Now, if a Rasha is enjoying good fortune, should one confront him? Now, I must tell you that there are certain questions where the answer is very simple and there's only one answer. There's sometimes where the question I'm asking over here depends on a machlekes. There's a dispute about it. And so there's two opinions, right? So the question is, what are the opinions? Who gives the opinions? If a Rasha is enjoying good fortune, should you confront him? And it might depend. It might depend whether it's for your own personal affairs or for general, for matters pertaining to Torah mitzvahs and so on and so forth. All these different conditions should be answered as part of the answer, so that you review what the Gemara actually had to say about this. Okay, Daf 7. It says, how do we know that Megillah Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh? Now, there's not just one answer. There are many answers. And just for the fun of it, mention as many. Try to discover as many answers as you can. Now,
Rabbi,
yeah.
are you going to go to the whole Megillah, the pages?
What do you mean? I go to Daf 17. Right, 2 questions on each. I'll speed up a little bit.
But can you send it? Can you email it?
I'm going to send it to everybody. I'm going to send it to everybody. I'm sending this document to everybody.
Okay. Because I'm trying to write it and it's
No.
Okay.
I'm going to send it to you. Okay. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of matanot le'evyonim, how many gifts do you have to give and to how many people? And the Gemara tells us it's based on what it says in the Psukim over there. The Gemara learns from the words matanot le'evyonim, how many gifts and to how many people. Okay, Daf 8. This is the complicated Daf. So if you choose to skip this, I won't. I'll understand.
Up to now, I knew the answer. So
all right, so let's see if you know the answer to these. Number 1, in order to need to count 7 days before going to mikvah, Ezav must see at least how many unnatural discharges. We said there's a difference between 1 and 2 and 3. So how many discharges does he need to see before he has to count 7 days? Okay, that's the question. The next question is a zavaktana. This is not a man, but a woman who experiences an unnatural flow of blood for 1 or 2 days after her 7 days of nida. The question is, how long does she need to be clean for before she can go to the mikvah? Okay, the Gemara tells us exactly how long she has to be clean for. If you get those answers, kol hakavod. If you don't, it's okay. If you have an art scroll, it shouldn't be that difficult. Even if you have a Steinsaltz, it shouldn't be that hard. And if you know how to navigate Rashi, it shouldn't be hard either. Okay. Daf 9, there were lots of questions I could have asked, but I wanted to keep to 2. Let's go. Why did Talmud HaMelech, Ptolemy, keep the rabbis in separate places, right? Mark says explicitly why. And why did they take out the word aneves?
That's the easiest page.
Right. Why did they take out the word aneves? Okay, listen, you got to keep it light. You can't make it too serious. Okay, so now, can one use a private altar after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? Like I said,
Rabbi,
yes.
the word altar is with an A and not an E.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
So you wrote the best Hamikdash.
Oh, the best Hamikdash. Okay. The best. Okay. Listen. Okay.
Rabbi, you're helping us cheat by telling us what page the answers or the questions are.
That's the whole point.
Well, it's that's why I'm calling it questions for review, because it's really to help you retain the knowledge. It's not to catch you out. A lot of these questions, for example, can one use a private altar after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? It's not a simple answer. Right?
But whether you give the page or not is just a matter of time. How long it's going to take us to find.
Right. So I'm not trying. So I like to make it. People should spend their energy in trying to understand, and not the energy in trying to find the place. Okay.
Right.
Anytime a pasuk starts with the words "Vayihi bimei," what is it telling us? And I was very particular when it says "Vayihi bimei." Okay.
Right.
You'll see in the Gemara the difference. Okay. Daf Yud Aleph. How many years did Nebuchadnezzar reign? So it says clearly. And what was the proper place to start the count of the 70 years of Golus Bavel? Now, for that, you have to have listened carefully. I actually sent you all the documents with the different years and the chronology, etc. The question is, where was the right place to start counting the 70 years of Golus Bavel? Okay. Daf Yud Beis. Why didn't Vashti come to the party when she was called? And what did the Chachamim give Achashverosh? Excuse me, that's supposed to be what excuse? I'm sorry. What excuse? What excuse did the Chachamim give Achashverosh for not wanting to judge Vashti? They gave a very good answer. Daf 13. According to the Gemara, why did the daughter of Parai go to the river? What was she doing there? Why did she go down? She went for a particular reason, the Gemara tells us. And why did they gather women a second time for Achashverosh? This is a very good question. It makes no sense for the women gathering together after Esther had already become queen. The Gemara tells us the reason, and you'll see in the Gemara what it says over there, and whose idea it was, and so on and so forth. Okay, Daf 14. How many prophets were sent to the Jewish people? So that is a bit of a math. If you know your 2 times table, you'll be okay. And
you mean according to Megilla?
Yeah, according to the Gemara. According to the Gemara. The Gemara says how many prophets were sent. Well, the Gemara, the Mishnah tells us a certain number, right? Or the Bryce tells us a certain number, and the Gemara challenges that and then gives us the real number. So I'm asking for the real number. Okay, I'm asking for the real number. And then why were only some of them written down? Why were only some prophecies written down? Okay, and the others were not. The Gemara gives us the reason why. Daf 15, who was Malachi? It's not a straightforward question. There are different opinions. So, looking for different opinions. How many sons did Haman have? Different opinions. What motivated the servants to tell the king that nothing good had been done for Mordechai? Did they love the Jews? Did they love Mordechai? I mean, what was motivating them?
It's simple.
Tell the king? Well, so the Gemara says what the reason is, and how do we know that studying Torah is greater than building than the building the Migdash, the Beit Migdash? And Daf 17. Why does the Torah record Yishmael's years? We just went through that today. So those are the questions. I'm going to save this document. I'm going to send it to all of you, to everybody, and you fill it out when you can. And I hope it's helpful for you to do Chazara. And Be'ezus Hashem, tomorrow we will start chapter 2, the Ezes Hashem Yisborech.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No problem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.